Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. Octane 2018 and the MODO plugin allow for the rendering of a new procedural geometry type called Vectron. Vectron sounds like a giant fighting robot, but it is, in fact, I assure you, geometry created from the OSL or open shading language. And so you create some code in open shading language or grab some code from the open shading language that creates a procedural object, and Vectron renders this. So I'm going to show you how this works, and we'll talk a little bit about its usefulness. So here I've got an empty mesh item, nothing's in it. If I hit render on Octane here, nothing's happening because there's no polygons in there. And way at the bottom, it's probably off your screen, but you're just going to have to trust me. There is a button that says Add Mesh to Schematic. So I'm going to click that, and in my schematic, you're going to see the mesh with the Octane geometry channel visible. Now, instead of hitting the button, I could just like drag it in and then go over to channels and drag this channel over there, the Octane geometry channel, which is right there. So I could do it that way, or you could just hit the button, have it do it for you. Either way is fine. And over here on our Octane toolbar, we have a new geometry button. Click that. It'll see Vectron. Got a Vectron node. Going to hook the output out to the Octane geometry input. And I want to make sure on my mesh item I have, it is critical to have live geometry update selected. So that geometry data is being shared with Octane. I'll refresh Octane here. And what you see is a sphere, or at least most of a sphere. And that is the default Vectron procedural geometry. So without loading up another OSL file, you just get a sphere. I can actually select my Vectron node here and click Edit Node and see the actual code. This is the OSL shading language, open shading language code to create a sphere. The code can spit out a couple of channels like radius and translate. That'll expose them for us if I want to change the radius or the translation. There's also a bounds setting here, which is sort of a bounding box where I can chop this down to 1 and it'll, I don't know, 2 maybe. It'll sort of chop into the 1.5. There we go. Sort of chopping into the sphere there. Now I can add geometry to my mesh item. So in this case, if I want to add just a sphere, just like I have here, it's not actually going to render the sphere polygons. In fact, let me double the radius. I think the standard MODO sphere is a radius of 0.5, or radius of 0.5, a diameter of 1, while the standard Vectron sphere is double that with a radius of 1. So I'm just going to double this here. So I can use this sphere in the viewport as a sort of proxy item. These polygons are not being rendered. It's only rendering the OSL that's overriding whatever's in this layer here. So I can have a dog instead of a sphere, but a sphere is obviously easier for me to keep a point of reference on since I'm rendering a sphere. Let me just put my bounding box back out to 10. So there's my sphere. All right, well, Vectron can do a sphere. Sort of interesting, I guess, but it can also do more than that. So in addition to just using the standard sphere that it just sort of defaults to, I can browse and load in a file. So here I've got an OSL file called Mandelbulb, and that will load up this procedural Mandelbulb fractal. I'm going to hit refresh here, and here we've got it coming in. Let me just fix up the scene a little bit, add some lighting real quick. Okay, so I loaded in an HDR and adjusted. There's some exposed channels here, similar to radius. We've got one for power, one for iterations, one for bailout, whatever that is. Let's change iterations to, I don't know, something like 20. I have no idea what that does, but it'll change the fractal thing a little bit. Maybe change the power to 9. I don't know. Get something a little different. Anyway, so, it's creating this geometry from just code, and it's pretty cool. I mean, yes, it's very impressive that it's got some godforsaken number of polygons in there being created, I guess, just on the fly with this OSL shading code, and there it is being lit in real time in this GPU renderer with path tracing. Really impressive, but not, I don't know, super useful yet. I can actually add a material to this, and you don't do that the standard way where you create a mask on a shader tree and do it in there. Instead, you just hook one up right to this Vectron node, so it has a slot for material. So I can just say new material and do, I don't know, like a glossy material. there. We'll just make it red. How about make it a little more scary looking? Why not? Red Vectron mandible. Okay, so that's how you can add materials to it that way and do all your shading in the schematic like that. And again, pretty interesting. There's some OSL code that I think is more useful than a sphere or a fractal object. And I'm actually going to pause this real quick here, and I'm just going to push back into my Vectron node. If I go over to Octane 2018 proper, and I load up, let's say, this Vectron fur test. So there it is. And again, it's just a code, right? So here's the code for the fur. It's just a couple dozen lines of code. And I can, just select it and copy it and go back over to MODO. And let me actually stop my Octane rendering, so I'm not rendering in Octane and MODO at the same time. That'd be good. And yeah, so I can select my Vectron node here and say edit node, and I can just select all this text and hit delete and paste in my fur text, and I guess hit play to compile it, and now I've got fur. Like it's cool. It's definitely cool. I'm just not sure what they're gonna do with it. So, maybe I did read a post on the Otoi forums that they've got programmers working on just a whole bunch of useful OSL primitives. So, hopefully more. I don't see this as being create a teapot and scatter it around. You can use this for the basis. I could feed this into a replicator, which is really cool. So if I want to, let me just sort of expand out here. I'm gonna pause this and push up my schematic. So I'm seeing, like fur or, I don't know, like terrain maybe, ocean waves. That's the kind of stuff I see being useful. I'll just create a cube here and use that as my particle source. So yeah, so my Vectron, not my Vectron, but my mesh with the Vectron going into it can be used as a prototype. So this fur ball will be used as a prototype. And let me just push back, and it's on this cube here. So, there it is. And if I hit go, I should have lots of fur, and I do. So yeah, I suppose you could have a procedural tree or grass, stuff like that, where I think it's super memory efficient and is just running really just a few lines of code to get that is really impressive. And we need something more useful than furballs or mandrel bulbs or spheres. But anyway, that's how it works. We got Vectron.
Yum, yum!